Why isn't Donald Trump coming tomorrow? Because he has a 4-year-old mentality, and he's having a tantrum. What is the tantrum? That the rest of the world says, we don't want a king.
This project we launched today is more than a highway. It is a gateway to prosperity, unity, and transformation. It positions Kenya as a leader in innovative financing.
These efforts will meaningfully advance Kenya's Vision 2030 and support the long-term prosperity and the cohesion of the region.
The story you are about to hear is not just about a road. It is about a choice, one bold decision that shook two of the world's biggest powers. In 2025, Kenya stood at a crossroads. On one side, the United States, raising warnings, whispering pressure, calling the plan risky, calling the partner a threat. And on the other side, China, arriving with a $1.5 billion promise to rebuild an entire highway system that millions of Kenyans had prayed for, begged for, and waited for. For decades, this wasn't just construction. This wasn't just concrete. This was dignity, hope, movement. The chance for small businesses, farmers, students, mothers, and truck drivers to finally feel connected to their own country again. And when Kenya chose China, Washington didn't just react, Washington panicked, because this road did something deeper. It showed the world that Africa is choosing its own path, refusing to be bullied, refusing to be lectured, refusing to be controlled. Tonight, we break down the deal that America never wanted to happen, the deal that China embraced instantly, and the deal that has become the $1.5 billion symbol of a new Africa rising, no matter who feels threatened. Kenya's $1.5 billion road deal with China did not begin with politics, power games, or diplomatic warnings. It began with something much simpler and much more human: frustration. For years, Kenyans watched roads crack, collapse, flood, and choke traffic for hours. They watched small farmers lose produce because they couldn't reach markets in time. They watched truck drivers sleep on the roadside because potholes slowed transportation to a crawl. They watched children walk long distances because the roads their parents were promised never arrived. And as the pressure grew, as the demand for modern infrastructure became unavoidable, Kenya knew it had one question to answer: who is willing to help us build the future we deserve? For months, Kenya negotiated quietly. It listened to proposals from Western agencies, from American-backed lenders, from European partners promising sustainable models and careful financing. But behind the polished language and diplomatic smiles, there was hesitation. There were conditions, there were warnings disguised as advice, and there were delays, always delays. Meetings that led nowhere. Studies that took years, recommendations that solved nothing. Then China entered the room. Beijing did not arrive with lectures. It arrived with blueprints. It did not offer theories. It offered machinery, engineers, workers, and a timeline. It did not analyze Kenya's needs through a lens of charity. It treated Kenya like a partner, not a dependent. And when Kenya laid out its dream, a modern expressway system connecting ports, cities, farms, universities, and industrial hubs, China said one sentence that changed everything: we can start tomorrow. The American side was shocked, even more shocked when they learned the cost. $1.5 billion, not for studies, not for proposals, not for future talks, for actual roads, real work, real machines, real progress. America had spent years urging African countries to diversify partnerships, yet when Kenya diversified in a direction Washington didn't like, the warning started immediately. U.S. analysts called the project a strategic red flag. Diplomats whispered about consequences. Military officials said it increased China's influence. In East Africa, media outlets claimed Kenya was falling into a trap. But on the ground, where real life happens, not in offices or TV studios, Kenyans celebrated. For the first time in years, a government decision felt like it touched ordinary people. Construction crews arrived before sunrise. Bulldozers tore through long-ignored bottlenecks. Engineers mapped out new lanes, new bypasses, and new access roads. Villagers gathered to watch as concrete mixers rolled in like giants. For many, it was the first time they had seen a major project take shape right in front of them. This wasn't just any road. It was an artery, an infrastructure lifeline designed to change how an entire country moves, trades, grows, and functions. The first section linked busy urban centers with expanding towns. The second opened access. Two industrial zones that had struggled with poor transport. The third connected ports to highways that had previously been nightmares for truck drivers. Every kilometer built promised fewer accidents, faster travel, and new economic opportunities. And as the project became visible, America's fear became louder. Washington's concern was not truly about Kenya's roads. It was about what those roads represented. Every major Chinese-built project in Africa tells a silent story. China is winning influence without firing a single bullet. China is gaining trust without forcing anyone's hand. China is securing partnerships through construction, not confrontation. While the US debates, delays, and warns, China builds, and that reality, to Washington, is terrifying. But Kenya did not choose China because of politics. It chose China because China delivered, and Kenyans understood something many foreign analysts still refuse to accept. Development is not ideological. A road does not ask where funding came from. A highway does not debate geopolitical alignment. Concrete does not care about international rivalry. Kenya needed infrastructure, and China offered it without hesitation. Local businesses immediately felt the impact. Fresh produce moved faster. Transport companies saved fuel costs. Students reached schools on time. Tourism routes opened. Land value around new junctions skyrocketed. Investors who had ignored interior regions suddenly paid attention. And across the country, a quiet but powerful truth formed: when infrastructure grows, a nation grows. Yet the US response became more aggressive. Think tanks published reports suggesting China's road might give Beijing logistical advantages. Media headlines used phrases like debt pressure, even though Kenya structured the deal with clear repayment plans and long-term revenue projections. Diplomats warned Kenyan officials about choosing the wrong side. US lawmakers argued that China was weaponizing infrastructure. But for many Africans, these warnings sounded familiar. They sounded like a repeat of a history where the West wanted control without responsibility, influence without investment, and loyalty without respect. For decades, African nations asked for development help and were told to wait, adjust, reform, cut, and comply. China simply asked, "Where do we build?" Kenyan leaders responded to US criticism with calm confidence. They explained that the project was not about geopolitics, it was about national progress. They reminded the world that Kenya has sovereignty, the right to choose partners, and the responsibility to pursue development wherever it can be found. Kenya was not abandoning the West. Kenya was expanding its options, and a confident Africa is something the world was not prepared for. But what truly made this road emotional, what made it more than a construction project, were the voices of ordinary Kenyans. Mothers who used to wake at 4 a.m. because unpredictable traffic made reaching work impossible. Farmers who lost half their harvest because the road to the market was broken beyond repair. Students who walked dusty kilometers because the bus route avoided dangerous potholes. Small businesses forced to close early because suppliers couldn't reach them on time. All these people looked at the new road and didn't see geopolitics. They saw dignity, generational change, a future. Drivers who once spent 3 hours in traffic moved in 30 minutes. Families that avoided certain areas due to insecurity now traveled freely. Ambulances that used to crawl through broken roads now reached hospitals faster. For the first time in years, Kenya felt connected to itself again. The US, however, viewed every kilometer built as a loss of influence. Washington worried that China's involvement in Kenya's infrastructure could expand into security agreements, technology partnerships, or trade preferences. But these fears came from a mindset that sees Africa as a battleground, not a partner. China saw Africa as a market, a friend, a collaborator. The difference shaped everything. And this is where the emotional core of the story lies. This $1.5 billion road is not only concrete and asphalt, it is a statement. It is Kenya saying, "We will not wait anymore. We will not slow our dreams to match someone else's politics. We will not be forced to choose between development and diplomacy. We will build our future on our terms." Economists across Africa have pointed out that modern infrastructure is the foundation of any nation's rise. The United States built highways before it built global power. China built roads before it built superpower status. Europe built transportation networks before industrializing. Africa finally is doing the same, and some people cannot accept that. With each section completed, the emotional pride grew stronger. Kenyan workers trained by Chinese engineers gained new skills. Local companies joined the supply chain. Entire towns grew around construction sites. New shops, new stations, new small businesses. The road acted like a magnet for development. Families moved closer, investors set up warehouses, logistics firms expanded. Land that was once ignored became valuable. But with growth came criticism. Western analysts accused Kenya of aligning too closely with Beijing. Yet Kenyans themselves argued that they were simply aligning with opportunity. A country cannot reject progress out of fear of someone else's geopolitical insecurity. A nation must prioritize its people. Then came a turning point. A US official publicly stated that Kenya's road deal was a strategic warning for Africa. But many Africans heard a different message. "We are afraid Africa is changing without our permission." This statement angered many, because Africa does not need permission to develop. Africa does not need permission to build roads. Africa does not need permission to design its own destiny. Kenya's leadership responded by insisting that every nation has the right to choose partners based on national interest. They reminded the world that the West had decades to invest heavily in African infrastructure and did not. And now that China is filling the gap, the world expects Kenya to apologize. No, this time Kenya stood firm. And the truth is simple, the US did not fear the road. It feared what the road symbolized: an Africa that no longer waits for approval, an Africa that negotiates boldly, an Africa that builds with whoever respects its vision, an Africa that is rising and cannot be stopped. As construction neared completion, something profound happened. Ordinary Kenyans began sharing stories online. Before and after videos of the road went viral. Drone shots of newly paved highways lit social media on fire. Kenyan youth, who usually feel excluded from politics, celebrated this project as a symbol of hope. People traveled just to take pictures of the finished sections. It became more than infrastructure, it became national pride. The $1.5 billion road became emotional because it touched every layer of society. It touched farmers, students, traders, families, businesses, and future generations. And for the first time in a long time, Kenyans felt that the world was watching, not because of crisis, but because of progress. China also understood the emotional weight. Its engineers worked with a sense of urgency, aware that this project had geopolitical eyes on it. They committed to finish ahead of schedule, determined to show Africa that partnership can be fast, effective, and respectful. And when journalists interviewed Chinese engineers, many said the same thing: Africa deserves infrastructure that matches its potential. It was not just business, it was pride. But what made the US uncomfortable wasn't simply watching China succeed. It was watching Kenya embrace a new kind of agency, a new confidence, a new direction. For decades, African nations were pressured to accept aid with conditions, loans with strict rules, or development plans that favored foreign interests. But now African governments negotiate like equals, choosing competitive partners, comparing offers, demanding better terms, and rejecting deals that don't serve their people. The road became a symbol of this shift, a $1.5 billion symbol that Africa is no longer waiting for slow processes and empty promises. Africa is building fast. Africa is upgrading fast. Africa is partnering smartly. And every kilometer of new road reminds the world that Africa is stepping forward into a century of self-determination. In the final months of construction, the US attempted to re-engage Kenya with new proposals, new partnerships, and new diplomatic visits. Officials aimed to show that America could still be a key ally. But the lesson had already been learned: pressure does not build roads. Warnings do not pave highways. Threats do not connect cities. Only commitment does. Kenya's decision to proceed with the Chinese-funded road was not an act of defiance. It was an act of responsibility. It was a promise to its people that dreams delayed would no longer be dreams denied. And when the final layer of asphalt was poured, when the highway stretched clean and flawless across the landscape, shining under the sun like a new era written in concrete, Kenyans felt something powerful: a sense of arrival. This was not just development, this was transformation, this was ownership. This was the moment Kenya told the world, we decide our future. And even if America calls it a strategic warning, Kenyans call it something far more meaningful: progress.